You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge.
It was the 1980s. Reagan was in his first year as president, and the civil rights movement was in the past. But racism was still present. There was a constant tension between police and the African American community throughout America, but especially in Los Angeles. The police had been known to frame African Americans and treat them horribly. Then over a few days in 1992, it all exploded, and that tension turned into a social war that nearly had one of the largest cities in America crumbled into pieces. This war of racism and hip-hop had lasted 15 years and is still present today. This war caused by hip-hop and racism shed new light on an age-old conflict. This is why the rise of hip-hop in the 1980s created a social movement that has shaped America into what it is today.
Clap your hands, everybody, if you got what it takes. Cause I'm Curtis Blow, and I want you to know that these are the breaks.
The hip-hop world first blew up with this song, The Breaks by Curtis Blow, produced by Mercury Records in 1980. This specific song had more of a disco beat and wasn't about racial tensions, but it definitely led to the start of the hip-hop genre coming into the mainstream. Curtis Blow became the first rapper to sign with a major record label when he signed with Mercury Records, and his first single, The Breaks, was the first golden album made by a rapper, which means that he was the first rapper to sell over 500,000 units of the same album. So even though the song was a lighthearted rap song, it paved the way for mainstream rap and inspired people to express themselves through hip-hop. The year was 1982. Gas prices were only $1.22. E.T. and the third Rocky movie were released this year, along with this song, The Message by Grandmaster Flash. Grandmaster Flash hit number 53 on the United States Top 100 charts. It was really the first hip-hop song about racial tension that became popular in the United States. At first glance, it may not look like this song is about racial tensions, but when you look at the music video, it shows that Grandmaster Flash is referring to the bad neighborhoods of LA and is trying to show people what it's like to live there. The song is also sending a message to the United States government that they need to change their ways, or else there may be some sort of social conflict. Now let's fast forward to 1986. The year a man named Tracy Morrow, better known as Ice-T, released this album, Rhyme Pays. This album was his first album, and it rocketed Ice-T into the world of fame. But what made this album so popular was that Ice-T wasn't scared of bringing up the social inequalities that the LAPD gave between white people and black people. For example, in the opening of this song, 6 in the Morning, he starts the song with a hypothetical of the LAPD coming to his door and him having to run away to avoid a confrontation with the police, because he feels that they are more dangerous to him than any problems that he could have on the streets. Then he goes on and raps about the stereotypes that people have for black neighborhoods and the issues that they face on a day-to-day basis. This was the first mainstream hip-hop song that directly addressed the inequalities that the government has depending on race.
Right about now,
Now it's 1988. Reagan was in his final year as president and gangster rap was officially in the mainstream. So when the young group called NWA released their premium album, Straight Outta Compton, it created a spark that fueled a revolution for the black community of LA for years. There were 3 million copies sold, and they got number 1 on the Billboard Top 100 songs. Songs like Straight Outta Compton and Police were direct shots at the LAPD and their racial biases. Some examples: Police, when Ice Cube says,
"Young nigga got it bad 'cause I'm brown, and not the other color, so police think they have the authority to kill a minority."
NWA was a young rap group made up of 5 members: DJ Yella, Dr. Dre, Eazy-E, Ice Cube, and MC Ren. Their premier album, Straight Outta Compton, was huge because it was one of the first major albums that was solely focused on pointing out flaws of the LA Police Department and how to get past those problems. Another quote from this song later on is when MC Ren has a skit in the middle of the song and says,
"Oh shit. Now what the fuck you pull me over for? 'Cause I feel like it. Just sit your ass on the curb and shut the fuck up. Man, fuck this shit. Alright, smart ass, I'm taking your black ass to jail."
This is why this album was so huge, that they were the first people to really address this. MC Ren said that this actually happened to him, which even if it didn't, things like this have happened before, and it really shined a light on all the bad things that the police department had been doing in LA for years. Even though NWA did take a lot of shots at the police, they also had different messages in other songs, such as this one. This song, narrated by Dr. Dre, is Express Yourself. Express Yourself is still about racial problems, but instead of Dre going after the police and exposing all of their racial biases, he sent a message to the black community, telling them that even though all the odds were against them, that they need to keep working and prove the racists wrong. That they need to push past racism by working harder and getting to a better place. That they need to prove that they aren't bad people, but they're just being put into a horrible position by the police and the government. NWA's Straight Outta Compton album was huge because they were in the present, in the problem, and they used their artistic talent to expose the racism of the police to the nation and inspire minorities across the nation to beat racism through rising above them instead of using violence. It was March 3rd, 1991. A man named Rodney King, who was just your average taxi driver, was beaten by 4 LAPD officers that had just finished a high-speed chase with King after he was caught speeding. Many officers were present in the scene, and King was hit nearly 50 times. King was released 4 days later without charges, but for him that by itself was not justice. Rodney thought that the police officers should have been punished for their actions, but on April 29, 1992, the 4 LAPD officers were acquitted, and this verdict caused outrage in the black community, and riots started to surface on the streets of Los Angeles. To be exact, at the intersection of Florence and Normandy, where a white truck driver was taken out of his truck and beaten. And at 8:45 that night, the mayor called the National Guard and brought over 1.1 thousand Marines, 600 Army soldiers, and 6.5 thousand National Guard troops to patrol the streets. The riots lasted 5 to 6 days, but that's all they needed. In that time, over $1 billion worth of property was destroyed. 63 people were killed, and thousands others were injured. And during that time, over 12,000 arrests were made just in Los Angeles alone. Plus, during a civil lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles, the U.S. District Attorney awarded King $3.8 billion instead of the requested $56 billion King wanted. And no money was awarded for punitive damage, even though he asked for $15 million. The LA riot shook the world, and it forced people to believe what the rappers have been saying for the last 10 years. For the last 10 years, the rappers have been trying to warn people about all the horrible things that the LAPD had been doing to the black community. But when they didn't listen to them with words, the black community had to use actions. Although many rappers and important influencers had spoke out against racism, such as NWA and Ice-T, and knew an event as this was bound to occur if they didn't heed their warnings, much pain and suffering was brought upon the people of LA. Even after the riots, not much has changed. Tensions still run high between the people of the black community and the police, and people are scared that something like this might happen again. Conflict and compromise during the rise of hip-hop in the 1980s. There was a lot of conflict between the rappers and the police. The police were disliked by a majority of the black community of LA because they had racial tendencies that hurt the black community. The rappers had a conflict with the police because they openly talked about the police's problems and tried to explain to the world why it was wrong. And in terms of the compromise, this is what makes this topic so relevant, that there still hasn't been a compromise. The revolution that artists started 20 years ago is still going on, and there are still protests speaking out against police brutality. And they were inspired by the 1992 LA riots, and black communities have been using that inspiration to stand up for what is right in this world. And the government is still trying to figure out how to fix this major issue. In summary, throughout the 1980s, hip-hop rose into the mainstream and created a social movement that has shaped America into what it is today, because of factors such as Curtis Blow's rise to fame and turning hip-hop into a mainstream genre, then Grandmaster Flash addressing the issues that black neighborhoods have to face because of the police's racial bias, and The Message, followed by 6 in the Morning's potent message and widespread exposure of the injustices that black people face. Finally, NWA dropped a bomb when they released Straight Outta Compton. Straight Outta Compton took direct shots at the police and inspired the black community to rise above the hate. Then from April 29th to May 4th of 1992, the black community took a stand for what they believed in and kick-started a movement that is still happening today. From Ferguson to Baltimore, the black community has rose upon the inspiration of LA in the 90s and has started standing up for what they believe in. This has also led to another generation of rappers, such as Logic and Kendrick Lamar, to speak out against the heinous things that have been done to them. And although racism hasn't truly been eradicated from society, the hip-hop and rap era of the 1980s and 90s shed new light upon and helped people understand that racism was something that they were going to have to face in their lives. Also, hip-hop inspired others to use their musical talents to speak out against racism.